It's unlikely that both Rahseem Mostert and Achane are both top 5 fantasy running backs again this year. However, we feel very confident that Tyreek Hill will have yet another massive season. We dig into the entire Miami Dolphins offense and their 2024 fantasy outlook on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we're moving on to the Dolphins today and giving them their episode, going through their offense, talking about their fantasy outlook. Last year, I mean, it was a really good fantasy season for them, right? But they ended up kind of slowing down towards the end of the year, finished second place in the AFC East, lost very badly to the Chiefs in the cold in the wild card round. But they did finish second in points per game in the season, third in fantasy points per game. Tyreek Hill finished as the wide receiver 1 in points per game, wide receiver 2 overall. Both Rahseem Mostert and Achane finished as top 4 running backs in fantasy points per game. Tua, it was kind of up and down in fantasy points. It started strong. It got worse as it went on. They ended up giving Jaylen Waddle an extension this offseason, signed Odell Beckham Jr., signed tight end Jonnu Smith, and then drafted running back Jalen Wright in the fourth round. But they actually end up training a third rounder next year to go get him. So that we'll talk about Jalen Wright later on in the show. But let's start with the wide receivers. Tyreek Hill, right now he's sitting at wide receiver 2 ADP. Going as, anywhere from first overall to fourth overall, somewhere in that range. Do you think he still has another huge season in him? He's 30 years old. He just turned 30. I think he's good to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's really getting tight here to decide if you want CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. I think there are pros and cons with each of them, right? I mean, you can go through all and say, this guy's younger, this guy is in a better offense, this guy is a better quarterback. You could just do that, or this guy has better volume in the CeeDee Lamb case. But Tyreek Hill, I mean, again, it goes back to what we were talking about with the Bills and Josh Allen. Do you really think he's going to fall apart? He may not live up exactly to wide receiver 2, 3, 4 expectations, but is he going to finish in the top 10? Are you pretty confident in that? Yeah. So you have to think about that. How safe, quote, safe is this pick in terms of them staying healthy? If they stay healthy, what do you get? I mean, you can't too much forecast injuries, but Tyreek is getting up there, but I didn't see him slow down much last year. It could kind of happen quickly, right? It drops off very quickly for wide receivers, especially one that's played as much as Tyreek Hill. I mean, he's seen a lot of targets and snaps through the time of the Chiefs and the Dolphins. So it can happen rather fast. I would say just be prepared if there's a little bit of a slowdown. But that said, I don't think he's going to drop off too much from what we've seen because there's also not much else going on here, right? In the passing game, it's him and Jaylen Waddle. And we'll see what they do with the extra targets now with OBJ and Jonnu, like trying to mix that up. But the reason they're mixing it up is they can't find answers at that third and fourth spot, whether it's tight end or wide receiver. So, Hill and Waddle are going to dominate targets. So we start with that. And we also know Tua has a great connection and chemistry with him. So as long as Tua is there, he's going to facilitate Tyreek Hill's big plays. He's going to get the ball in Tyreek Hill's hands a lot. So again, he might slow down a little, but again, I think he's one of the safer picks out there because you know exactly what you're going to get in the offense. There's no mystery. There's no variable.
Yeah, I think he's extremely safe, not worried about him slowing down at all. Wide receiver 2 last year, but wide receiver 1 in points per game because he missed the one game. Wide receiver 2 in 2022, his first year with the Dolphins. Wide receiver 6 in 2021 with the Chiefs. Wide receiver 2 in 2020 with the Chiefs. Like, Every year this guy does it. And last year it could have even been better, but he suffered the ankle sprain that he was playing through not as well. He suffered that in week 14, but from weeks 1 through 13, he was destroying any other wide receiver in fantasy points per game. Hill was at 22 points per game in half PPR from weeks 1 through 13, while CeeDee Lamb was second at 18. He was scoring 4 more points per game than CeeDee Lamb during that span. He also, Tyreek Hill had 8 weeks where he finished as a top 3 fantasy wide receiver on the week, while CeeDee Lamb only had 5 such weeks. So I'm all in on Tyreek Hill, and I think if I'm choosing between Lamb or Hill, it's a hard one. That's a hard toss up. I do think I feel a little bit better about Hill's touchdown production and just his huge playability. But where would you go, CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill?
Oh, that's a tough call. I think Tyreek Hill can win you more weeks, but CeeDee Lamb is going to be more consistent and probably durable, right? So you have to decide what kind of team you want to build too. Some people like to swing for the fences and have the high upside players, but we know there's a bit of an attrition possibility with Hill, given his soft tissue history. He's got a little bit of that. He had a hamstring a few years ago as well. So there's that. There's the age. Lamb is in his prime. He's going out for his mega contract here. So I think I would slowly lean toward Lamb just because I think he's going to be a little bit more consistent. And the Cowboys are going to throw a ton, and they don't have a lot of weapons either. And they have Dak Prescott. So I'm going to add all that up to say Lamb is going to be a little bit more consistent. He can also have those spike weeks where I think Tyreek Hill, if teams focus on him, we know they can take him out of the game, especially if he's a little slower and has that injury potential to worry about as well.
Yeah, with Jaylen Waddle, I think this discussion's a little bit harder, right? Like Tyreek Hill, if you pick him, you're gonna get a great player. As long as he's healthy, he's gonna win you many weeks and he's gonna come through. That's why he's being picked as a top 3 player in drafts. But Jaylen Waddle, on the other hand, last year it was harder for him, right? Wide receiver 34 overall, but he missed 3 games. So wide receiver 23 in points per game. I will say though, he was even coming off the field a bunch in some of the games he did play. So in the 10 games, he played at least 40 snaps. He averaged 13.3 points per game in half PPR. That's not like amazing, but that is the same amount of points as Jamar Chase averaged last year. And Jamar Chase was a wide receiver 12 in points per game in half PPR last year. We saw Waddle have a big year in 2022 when he was the wide receiver 7 overall, wide receiver 13 in points per game. Now he's sitting at wide receiver 16 cost. 28th overall. He's right around Brandon Ayuk and Mike Evans and Michael Pittman Jr. Are you feeling that Waddle will have a bigger year this year than he did last year?
Yeah, I mean, this guy's always dangerous to put up a big year. I think there's some fluctuation based on his targets. And again, he's got a little durability concerns there as a smaller receiver. Keep in mind how he's evolved. He used to be just basically an extended handoff, short passing game guy. Now he's a big after the catch guy that you get him in the open field and he can do some damage there. And that's where his big plays come a little bit more than Tyreek Hill, just with the pure speed and blowing by everyone. He's got quickness. He's going to get high volume. Again, there's some fluctuation with that third target in Miami. So we're not quite sure. But looking at these other players around him, I mean, Mike Evans is clearly the alpha in his offense, and he's as consistent as he gets. Michael Pittman as well. You might, however, look at Brandon Ayuk and Cooper Kupp and say, hey, there's some other guys there that are making some big dents. Who do I like more as the number 2 in terms of the competition and the usage? Then you would say Jaylen Waddle is where I want to go. So it's a tough call. Do you want to go for a number 1 on a team that has maybe a different guy that could help as the number 2 or 3? Or do you want to go with the number 2 where there's really not help behind? So that's always a tough question, right? So I look at maybe Evans and Pittman. I think Evans has the touchdown edge and the big play edge. Pittman has maybe the volume edge. Waddle's somewhere in between. So I think it's fair to take him over either of those guys. My personal preference would be taking one of those guys instead. I think Pittman is due for some touchdown positive regression here. And I know Mike Evans is always going to come through every single year.
Yeah. So, but also Waddle should be due for some positive touchdown regression as well.
Yeah.
Only had 5 last year. Actually 4 receiving touchdowns last year. He had 8 the year prior. I do expect that to go up. He was still on a 17-game pace for 126 targets, over 1,200 receiving yards if he didn't get hurt. So, like, I think Waddle's a solid pick. but he's going to have it's going to be inconsistent. But the guys he's going around are also very inconsistent with Ayuk and
Yeah.
Evans. That's just the range he's going, where they're going to give you game winning weeks because they have that huge upside. There's going to be a lot of down weeks. I think I prefer, like, if I'm looking at Mike Evans or Jaylen Waddle, I just prefer Mike Evans because we know the touchdowns will be there just every single year. But it is close, and I do think Waddle is a very fair price. So if you're in on him, I don't think you're overpaying for him. I think he's a very fair price.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get out of the park return on him, right? I mean, you're probably just going to say, okay, I'm getting wide receiver 16, possibly. I mean, I could move up to like wide receiver 13 or 14, but there's a lot of talented guys there in that top 12 that it's going to be hard to crack that for a lot of receivers, not just Waddle. So it'll be fun to see how his ADP kind of ends up being as we get closer to drafts in August. We'll turn our attention to the backfield because it's not two guys there. It's maybe either or with Devin Achane and Rahseem Mostert and a little bit of Jaylen Wright. So we'll talk about that in our next segment here on the show. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. A small business is like a big time team, right? That you're trying to put together a tight knit group that's going to work together and bring you home big wins. Well, LinkedIn is there for you. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn is going to help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. You'll get some uniqueness to your organization, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. If you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking on the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier for you as well. So they're going to provide support that way. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Why aren't you? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right. This is an interesting scenario here with the backfield. Rahseem Mostert was a big-time scorer last year. He had 21 touchdowns, and that helped him to have an elite finish. But Devin Achane, in very limited touches, was also explosive and fantastic. Now, Rahseem Mostert is 32. He did get re-upped a little bit, but he's no longer wearing his jersey number age at 31. He's 32. That was his biggest volume season by far in his career with the 49ers, Dolphins, other teams. He's never seen that volume because partly he hasn't been able to stay on the field with knee injuries and all that. So the question is, 32-year-old Rahseem Mostert, history of durability issues. Devin Achane, a little bit of durability coming out of the gate as a rookie. Is the separation as big as it should be here? Achane is going in the RB1 range, in the top 12, 6 through 12 in that range. And you have Mostert way down there at RB27, RB3. Is this fair, Michelle?
I don't know. It's so hard. Like, I really like Rahseem Mostert's ADP. I love that he broke out last year, scored 21 touchdowns, and people are like, you know what? We're still gonna keep him low because he's 32 years old. He has to split a backfield. So I understand why his is a little bit lower, but I think this is probably way too low for the running back 2 last season, only behind Christian McCaffrey. But you cannot expect him to score even close to 21 touchdowns, right? And we do expect Devon Achane to get a bigger workload. I will say, though, I don't think either of these guys need a big workload to be very, very good. So even in just games, Mostert had at least 10 carries. He averaged 19 points per game in half PPR, and that was 13 games. He had 10 carries. If you just go up to 12 carries, he averaged 22 fantasy points per game. Like this what they did with their workload was insane because Achane was even more efficient than Mostert. So I don't think either of them need a huge workload, but at the same time, there is no reason for there to be such a big gap because Achane, yeah, he has a high ceiling, but we saw like it dwindle off a little bit towards the end of the year. Like his efficiency wasn't as insane as it started because it was never going to be able to stay that way, right? So I do think Achane's a little too expensive. I think Mostert's a little too cheap. And that's why I'm going to have way more Mostert on my teams than Achane this year.
Yeah, this is very interesting because we have a lot of hype over Devin Achane, and he seems like clearly, like if there was a neon light flashing around him in the draft, it would say this is a boomer bust pick, a big time boomer bust pick. You're swinging for the fences, but you know you could strike out and be in just a real bad spot, right? And wasting your early pick. I'm going to lean towards boom, and here's why. Mostert, again, I mentioned the age. I just don't trust running backs that old. I think last year was an anomaly, not just the touchdowns, but the fact that he produced as a journeyman at that level. So I think he's very good, and the touchdowns still could come, right? They could be
He had more.
right?
He had more. Wait, hold on. So he had more touchdowns last year. He had more rushing touchdowns last year than he scored over his first 8 seasons combined in the
Yeah.
NFL.
Wow. Yeah, well, he didn't touch the ball. I mean, that was the first year where he was on the field, and he used to be a special teams ace. That's how he got on the field, even and the 49ers kind of said, okay, we got all these guys getting hurt. Let's give him that year. And then he got hurt. So, right. So I'm a little bit concerned when you have the knee injury in the past, right? So when you look at it, if he gets 10 or 11, as I said, Michelle, like I think that could retain some good value if he gets even there with the touchdowns. And Achane goes up to 10. But where I like Devin Achane is that he can win games for you with his big playability. He can take over some games. I also think he's more effective and will get some more opportunities as a third receiver. I know they have OBJ and Jonas Smith, but maybe they'll try to get Achane into open field. He also is not going to come out of the gate with a bit of an injury that he had last year that kind of slowed him to get his usage. So I think this is a good punch in the backfield, but I think both of these things can be true. That Devin Achane can be a top 10 running back, and Raheem Mostert is being undervalued as RB27. I think he should be more into the RB2 range in the top 24. So I think both of these things can be true just based on the nature of this offense and given it's not very complicated. They've got two mouths to feed, essentially, Hill and Waddle in the passing game. They have two mouths to feed here. I'm not too worried about Jaylen Wright. I think he's an excellent stash as a rookie behind both of these guys because the injury attrition hit both of them last year. So if you stash Wright, he's the preferred guy you want as kind of a strange dual handcuff, right? Behind these guys over a Jeff Wilson Jr. You're not going after Jeff Wilson Jr. or Salvan Ahmed. That's what Wright gives us. A little bit more certainty. And the one spot we didn't know who's going to be the backup if one of these guys goes down. But I think they can have standalone value, independent value of each other. And I think exactly what you're looking at. High upside RB1 for Achane and an underrated RB2 for Mostert.
Yeah, it is so interesting with their pick on Jaylen Wright because he ran a 4.38 at the combine. And he's also not like small, right? He's not as small as Achane. So it's interesting. They're just going for such speed. Wright averaged 7.4 yards per carry. Last led the FBS among running backs. He also is a very talented guy. I really like Jaylen Wright coming out of school. It just seems like they're very similar type of players, though. So I am interested to see if Wright cuts into Achane's workload at all. And if that's the case, like they can't be splitting it 3 ways, right? 3 ways is going to really hurt their production. I still think Mostert's going to be used around the goal line, still be the main touchdown guy. So I really do like his value there. The biggest issue with Achane is like I could totally see him breaking out, but he's going right next to Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams, I'm just taking every single time over him. He just feels a lot safer to me in his role. He's been super efficient with his fantasy scoring as well. And instead of worrying about multiple people maybe stealing his workload, you only have to worry about Blake Corum, who we know, well, I guess we don't know, but feel pretty strongly that he's just like the kind of guy that will come in rotationally. I don't think he's going to be splitting the backfield half and half with Kyren Williams. So I feel a little bit better about Williams. That's why I'm staying off Achane because they're just going back to back there. Mostert's going around like he's going after Jaylen Warren. He's going after Jaylen. That's absolutely wild to me. Like take Mostert over Jaylen Warren, people, please. Please. That's all I ask for you this offseason.
Yeah, that comes from a Steelers fan, folks. So that's bona fide advice here over through and through. Now, yeah, Williams, I think I am actually a little bit worried about Blake Corum because he's like Williams, and I'm just surprised that was the team that went after him. The problem I'm going to call you out, Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan and all your other coaches that come. They're so fickle with their running backs that, I loved Evan Achane. You saw how excited he was, Mike McDaniel, when they drafted him. And then he got excited about drafting Jalen Wright. It's like every year, it's like, I'm going to look at a different shiny model. Like we had that with Shanahan, Elijah Mitchell. Then we looked, is Trey Sermon going to be a thing? No. Is Jordan Mason going to be a thing? No. Is Tyrion Davis-Price? And now you get another running back there, Isaac Guerrero. So these guys love to maybe collect backs. There used to be guys that used to collect quarterbacks. These guys just like to collect backs. So stick with these dudes. Like stick with them for a while. If the production is there and we can all see it, stick with them so we don't confuse us in fantasy. Like I don't want to see Jalen Wright and Blake Corum being the leading rushers of the Dolphins and Rams. That'll make me really upset. So I think they're good rookie backups, but let's not just play this year's model, folks. Like stick with the back, and hopefully that will happen with the production.
Now, we just brought up a lot of great fantasy producers. So you would assume that their quarterback would also be a great fantasy producer, but we didn't quite get that out of Tua Tagovailoa last year. It was a very inconsistent year. We'll dig into what we expect from him in fantasy this upcoming season to finish off the Dolphins fantasy forecast. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the NBA and NHL playoffs done, the WNBA on a midseason break, the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can make any summer night fun if you just go into the FanDuel app and bet whatever baseball game's going on that night that's on your television. Place a bet on it, and all of a sudden you have a super fun night and you're entertained for the next 3 hours. It's a great time. All you have to do is head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, let's hit on Tua Tagovailoa's 2024 fantasy outlook. Last year, he was the quarterback 11 overall, but just quarterback 21 in fantasy points per game. So that difference there shows you he was highly inconsistent. He just happened to play the entire year. So he was able to, kind of skew that overall finish there for him. He's right now being priced as the quarterback 13, 97th overall. He's going on average in drafts. Listen, he started the season pretty well, right? Had some really big games up there. But then the second half of the season, he was almost unusable. He doesn't get any rushing yards. He did not have more than 15 rushing yards in any game last season. He had 74 total rushing yards all season long last year. Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, those guys can do that in one single game. So he offers no floor with rushing. He offers no ceiling with rushing. And he also had 29 passing touchdowns last year, which is not nothing. Like that was tied for 5th in the league. Still was very unusable basically for fantasy. So he's going to have to get up there of 40 passing touchdowns to be a great fantasy asset. I'm off of Tua. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, I think the Dolphins might be leaning toward being off of Tua as well. I just think they're looking at probably, again, going back to Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan. Wait, we could probably get a Brock Purdy type somewhere cheap, and we don't necessarily want to invest in this guy at the top of the market, right? 40 million plus. I don't think he's proved he's a 40 million quarterback because a lot of
he's
this
going to be getting 50. He's going to be getting 50 million plus.
I hope not. That would be a big mistake, in my opinion, for the Dolphins, because I think the system is just so good, and we've seen it. And look, I know that Brock Purdy is a special quarterback for that system that is kind of related, adjacent, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if Tua is yet. And we should be a little bit more into Tua, right? He's in a great offense. And the other factor is what a twist, right? Last season, of all the things I didn't expect Tua Tagovailoa to do is play the entire season and not get hurt. So got to give him credit for that. He was durable on the field. We just thought, he's going to break down and not going to be out there. So What does that do, though? It increases the chances that we feel like he's going to probably break down this year at some point. I mean, he took a lot of hits last year. He takes a lot of hits because he can't run to escape. He's not Mr. Checkdown guy all that much, right? So he is getting whacked a lot, and that's not very good for his ability to stay on the field. And I also look at this offense. I mean, is it just the product of having great weapons? And then the other thing you look at is the running game is fantastic. So the touchdowns might be the thing that is the biggest asset right now for Tua, right? I mean, the yards are always going to be there and they're going to be pretty high, but they might be capped a little bit because the rushing success of this team, it's not going to push for the 5,000 that we're looking for at any point. And you made a great point. He gives you nothing as a runner. Like he just run in a few times, get like 3 or 4 touchdowns, fall over at the one, do something. And I thought he was a little bit more mobile than what we've seen here at Alabama. But again, I think it's also the nature of this offense. I mean, you don't see Purdy taking off and running. It's get the ball out and throw it quickly. And that's the one thing about Tua. He's going to step back, get it out quickly. They've tried to focus on that. When he's holding it, that's when he's trouble taking those hits and all that. So there's a little bit of a scouting thing on Tua, but I think coming back, bringing that to fantasy, Michelle, those are all the concerns I have. So again, Tua, there's just so many better values across the board that you can just target. I mean, Purdy is one of them that you take at the borderline QB1. I think Kirk Cousins is also up there that is being undervalued. I look at Matthew Stafford and his weapons a little bit behind. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Jared Goff, pretty much anyone around him, with the exception maybe, I know you like Justin Herbert a little bit more, exception of Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence, like I feel much better about in that 12 to 19 range.
Yeah, I mean, he's going back to back with Jaden Daniels. And I know Jaden Daniels is a complete question mark, right? But I'm going to take the upside with his rushing and if it fails, it fails. But at least I know I'm giving it a shot, unlike you're taking Tua. And then if you want to go with someone safer than a Jaden Daniels, like Jared Goff is going right next to him, at least then I have a guy that's going to be really great for fantasy for half of the season, and exactly play him. When he's at home, you can play Jared Goff, and he's going to have a great fantasy game. So at least with Jared Goff, you know when to play him. With Tua, yeah, he's a little bit better at home, but it's not like it is with Jared Goff. Just Tua is just not going to be on any of my teams. What about any interest in Odell Beckham Jr. that they added? I mean, he's going on 32 years old. He hasn't done anything since 2019. It's been a really long time now. Or Jonnu Smith. I mean, we saw him have some pretty good games with Atlanta. I mean, he had 3 top 5 finishes the tight end 3 1 week, tight end 4, tight end 5. The rest of the weeks were pretty much non-existent, but last year it was Durham Smith who had the 3rd most targets on this offense. It wasn't a lot, but it went Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, Durham Smith. So could we see Jonnu Smith be actually the 3rd target in this offense instead of Odell Beckham Jr.?
Yeah, I'm not in on OBJ. He had a little bit of stretch where he's making a few plays for the Ravens last year, but then he quickly faded and he's getting older. And yeah, no interest whatsoever. He'll make an occasional big player too, and that'll be coming in a few games, right? But they don't really factor him in as a 3rd receiver. They're not going to do it as much or more than they already have with Waddle Hill. So let's pass on OBJ. Now let's get to Jonnu Smith. He's an interesting deep sleeper. He's one of my favorite deep sleepers, strangely, this year. There are some rumors, and Michelle, I know you don't want to hear this if you're looking at Mostert or Achane, that there are some rumors coming out of camp that they're seeing him as a potential goal line option and short TD option for this team. Now, that would be very unusual. He hasn't really played that role.
Arthur Smith tried to give him one this last year.
So we're going to see. Maybe Arthur Smith is just not as good as Mike McDaniel in scheming that type of thing up. But Jonnu is kind of underrated. I mean, I've always liked him going back to the Titans. He's a pretty good athlete. He was a thorn in the side of Kyle Pitts managers last year, popping in. So he's a pretty good talent. I just feel like he's been misused for the most part in his career. So we'll see. I'm not going crazy. This guy's the last tight end 2 on the board. But again, in a 2 tight end league or tight end premium, if I'm going to take a dart late in a draft, Jonnu could be it. I mean, there's some interesting guys down there that you look at. It's kind of the deep sleeper central. I'm not into Noah Fant, but you could look at Isaiah Likely, Juwan Johnson, Ben Sinnott. So I think you want to pluck one of those guys at some point as a sleeper tight end. And Jonah, why not? I mean, in that group, maybe even his former Dolphin there, Mike Gesicki, is in that mix as well for the Bengals. So there's some random tight ends that have some names that we might be into. And Jonah, you're right. I think he has a good chance to anyone to be the key third target when you put together the yards, touchdowns, and catches.
Yeah, in a deep tight end premium league or a two tight end league, like earlier on in the summer, my guy this late was Juwan Johnson, but then he suffered the injury. We don't even know if he's going to be ready for the start of the season.
Yeah.
So, like, kind of got to get off of that, right? Because it was already a risky dart throw to begin with. I'm moving over to Jonnu Smith, though, in this area. Like, I think what's his ceiling? Probably tight end 10, but in a deep league where he's your second tight end or, just some depth on your bench if it's a tight end premium, I like to take a shot on him. Probably won't be much, but worth the shot there to see if he is a third target and can get some touchdowns. That is it for today's episode. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers, Vinnie and I will be back tomorrow talking about the New York Jets. It's going to be a great one. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.